Tonight's Shapeshifter is a shapeshifter with a difference. Her name is Sneha Shah. She's the managing director for Africa of Thomson Reuters. So if I asked you, what does Thomson Reuters do? You would say, Reuters, they do news. They take homing pigeons and they tie stories to homing pigeons' legs and they let them go in one city and the homing pigeon finds its way home and that's how the news is distributed. Well, that's how Julius Reuters did do it, didn't he? I mean, he revolutionized the news business, when, 1850s, thereabouts?
In the 1860s. He was the first person to bring transatlantic news to the world using carrier pigeons, exactly as you said.
Yeah, extraordinary. So, I mean, always on the cutting edge of innovation has Reuters been. And when did Reuters and Thomson get together then? Because Reuters being news and Thomson being data?
So you could sort of draw that distinction, although Reuters did have some data as well, but mostly in the financial space. But the marriage happened in 2008. And
Good
Thomson,
timing.
It was fantastic timing because I think the financial crisis, both companies would have really struggled to survive. But actually bringing the two companies together and the assets allowed us to really survive and thrive beyond 2008. And it's been really fantastic seeing, what Reuters brought to the equation was really that historic news piece and the trusted journalism around the world and the global footprint, as well as the financial data. And what Thomson brought was very much professional services data, so legal, tax information, intellectual property data, as well as a wealth of financial information. And so it was a really perfect time for the two organizations to get together.
Okay, I want to talk about Thomson Reuters and what it does, because there are some fabulous bits and people are going to be freaked out, I think, a little bit by the capacity of what Thomson Reuters can deliver and how it chooses to deliver those services. So do stay tuned. I'm talking to Sneha Shah. She is the managing director for Africa of Thomson Reuters. When did you join this business of Thomson Reuters?
I joined in 2001 in July in New York. So I joined the office in the US.
But you're born in Kenya.
Correct.
Not when was it? Rude question. You were born in Kenya at a time when Razia Khan, the economist from Standard Chartered, was born in Kenya, and you went to school together. Very posh.
So I think luckily she wasn't in my class, because if she was, I would have been way behind her because she's super intelligent. But yes, so we all went to similar schools in Kenya. Kenya had sort of obviously gotten independence from the UK, but during the time that the British had Kenya, a lot of Indians had moved over from India to Kenya. And so I'm third generation Indian, but brought up in Kenya.
So you are the third generation brought up in Kenya. So your grandparents came over? Were they born in Kenya as well?
No, they came over, and then my parents were born there, and then I was born there.
And what did grandparents come to do in Kenya?
So many of them came to help with the railroads, but my grandparents specifically came to open up shops next to the railroads.
Okay, so they were in retail. Yes. And your parents, did they follow that particular track?
Yes, so my dad was an entrepreneur, and he started off sort of importing spare parts, and then he started importing bitumen to build the roads. And then moved on to importing bathroom and sanitary ware, and so very much into the business world. And
so you're born into Kenyan entrepreneurship. You go to school in Kenya at the same time as Razia Khan, but you have quite a posh schooling system in those days.
Yes, very much. So the British legacy was a lot of British educational institutions, and a lot of the teachers also stayed behind. And so we were very much put through that system. And then it became a natural choice to then go to British University.
Which you did. And graduated with what? What was your degree?
Politics and International Studies.
Politics and International Studies, which is a good rounded education, which is a good British rounded education anyway.
Yes, it's a great course for when you don't know what you want to do with your life, but you want to sound like you know what you're talking about. So that's what I did.
But that gives you a global launch pad then out of UK university system.
Absolutely. So it was the reason I chose it was I was just very interested in politics, but also I thought that with the UN being headquartered in Kenya and a lot of international interest in Kenya, it would give me some career choices when I went back as well.
Did you go back?
I did go back, and I learned very quickly that the UN doesn't accept people with only first degrees. So I didn't have a master's degree, and so I started actually looking around in the industry to see who was hiring, and the banks were. So I was able to join a bank and got into the graduate training program. And so it's the CFC Bank that's now CFC Stanbic. Yeah. But I joined at that time.
And then you ended up in New York and ended up joining Thomson Reuters at the time, which brings you to a point where you then are sent back to Africa to manage the entire Africa business of Thomson Reuters. And that happens when?
That happened in 2013. Mm-hmm. So there was an opportunity. We were really looking looking at emerging markets very differently at that time at Thomson Reuters and realized that most of our growth was going to come from these global markets. And we weren't putting enough focus. We'd had mostly sales offices there, but we hadn't really put enough focus in saying, what do these markets actually need and how do we help them develop in a very different way? And so they created 10 global geographies where very special attention was paid. And then these MD roles in these geographies. And we were given, a lot of room to go and do what's right for those economies instead of just thinking about bringing global products into these markets.
And how have you grown the Thomson Reuters business on this continent?
So we've doubled in the last 4 years, and we expect to double again in the next 3 in terms of our size.
Is size a revenue size, or is size a geographical size? What is size?
So geographical footprint and headcount and revenue growth is definitely in double digits. So we're doing very healthily. And a lot of that has been not because we're sort of taking what we've got globally and selling in, but actually listening, talking to central banks, talking to financial institutions, talking to governments and saying, what do you actually need as you're making this transition from aid-based economies where you're trying to move to knowledge-based economies? What type of information, data, systems, automation do you need, and how can we help you do that?
Broadly, what are African governments looking for?
So many of them are looking for ways to generate revenue. So if you look at, our largest asset across the continent, it's land. And in many cases, the land records are not reliable. They're not digitized. You can't do property valuations in a reliable way. You can't develop mortgage markets. And that's where we step in and we help. We can help them digitize these land records. We can help them do valuations on them. We can help them generate their own revenue. So as oil prices drop and as sort of the traditional sources of income drop for these countries, they can start relying on new sources of income and become much more self-reliant.
So land valuations, I know, for example, that you've worked with the City of Cape Town and you've helped the City of Cape Town with their property valuation system. So if your rates bill in Cape Town has gone up in recent years, you can blame Sneha Shah because Thomson Reuters has helped that process. How does data and the data you gather through the network of Thomson Reuters then help you determine that X property in X area should be paying rates of Y and the one across the railway line should be paying half of that rate, for example?
So we look at a lot of comparables data, but we also do, we actually will do visual mapping from the air. So we actually can see from the air where it is. We've also got the land records. And then the city is very much involved in the valuation process itself. So it's not like we sort of tell them what to do. We just give them a lot of data of comparables in other sectors, in other industries, in other parts of the world as well. And they just look at that, put it together, and then they decide what to put on it.
So they decide on the price. You just provide the information that gives them the tools to make those decisions to execute on that.
Absolutely.
Now, you have got a very interesting business based in Cape Town, which employs how many people?
So it's 200 people in Cape Town.
Yeah.
And it's called World Check, and we do...
World Check, right?
And what we do is deep background checks on persons of interest, sanctioned entities, politically exposed people.
Sorry, persons of interest, politically exposed people. Yes, carry on.
And sanctioned entities. And so we help give banks, corporations and governments a lot of security around who they're doing business with. So we can map, for example, that Bruce does business regularly with Party B, but there's a Party C in the background that seems to be connected to both of them, and what are they doing? And we use only publicly available data.
But how do you harvest that information? What kind of information do you have access to that allows you to harvest information about little old me?
It's all publicly available data, so it's all public records. But the interesting thing that we do with it is we connect it. And that's what makes it really useful to our customers, because we are able to show that Bruce Whitfield, who's sitting in Johannesburg working for 702, is the same Bruce Whitfield that was sitting on that panel, was the same Bruce Whitfield that went on holiday in Kenya. So we are able to connect the dots in a way that you wouldn't be able to do if you were just trying to read the public news.
And the value of that kind of information?
It's extremely valuable. It's one of our fastest growing businesses, because if you look at what's hampering growth in Africa, it's a couple of things. One of them is obviously that the people are worried about regulation and risk, and the other one is that they're worried about who they're dealing with, because they don't know for sure that if they do business with someone that person is not going to be money laundering or is not going to end up being in the papers for the wrong reasons. And so we help them have that security, and as well as complying with regulations before they do business with those people.
What about my right to privacy? And again, at what point, where is the line that you would draw as an organization into terms of, here's public information that allows us to do use X, Y, and Z. You hand over a file of information. To whom? Who could ask you to harvest the information on a Bruce or on a Gupta or on a Des van Rooyen, for argument's sake, because the Guptas and Des van Rooyen, politically connected, highly influential people, are on these lists that the banks have of connected, politically influential people.
Yeah, so privacy is extremely important to us as a company. And as I said, we only use publicly available data. So it's nothing that people couldn't find out if they wanted to look at. It's just that we connect it in a different way. But also,
How do you
we
connect
are.
it? That's the
and that's the proprietary secret.
I'm going to get it out of you.
That's why we make money.
I'm going to get it out of you.
But I would say,
pause for a second. Say that, and then we're going to pause.
Okay, perfect. So I'll say that when we talk to people who want to buy information from us, we do a lot of customer checks before we onboard customers, and so we're not going to be selling data to people who wouldn't pass our records checks.
Hello, I'm from ABC Robbers, and we're wanting to break into houses in Sandhurst this evening. Can you tell us who's out tonight? And then you guys go off and ferret out the information.
I wish we had that sort of information. We don't.
Okay. Sneha Shah, just trying to establish the parameters here. Managing Director for Africa of Thomson Reuters. Now, if Thomson Reuters is in the business of data gathering and the sale of data, and Reuters is in the news business, it would make a logical sense that somebody from your newsroom could pop across the corridor and say to their chums at Thomson, hey guys, we need to know whether or not there's a connection between Des van Rooyen, Jacob Zuma, the Guptas, for argument's sake, hypothetically, just picking names out of the air. You know how this works. And that then would give them global exclusives, surely.
So one of the things that's really special about Thomson Reuters and has been across our 160-year-old history is we have something called the trust principles that really separate out the journalistic arm of our business from the business arm. And there's a very strong firewall between the two. And even within the business arm, who gets access to the databases is very strictly controlled. So for example, I'm not allowed to go and research the data. So we really are very tightly controlled in terms of who can access because we want to preserve our integrity and we want to make sure there isn't a blurring of the lines between the two.
So if somebody called Michael Bloomberg phoned up and said, hi, I'm just looking for some information on the Guptas, Jacob Zuma and Des van Rooyen and a trip to Dubai, would you sell him the data?
If he wants to buy access to our database, he's more than welcome to have some.
Again, there may be an element of pride in there as well. Just how deep can you delve? Because something like, and I'll pick randomly, just another one, the San Bernardino shooting. Terrifying. Yet the American authorities seem to crack that case very, very quickly. How did they do it?
Yeah, so we actually had a part to play in that, and the police department has come out and sort of also talked about it. But we've got public records, again, data available in the US, and we were able to, we work with the police departments on a regular basis to help them find data on individuals in the US. And we were able to track down an address that they didn't have in their systems. And so they were able to
So they knew a name, they had an identity on somebody, and they contacted you and say, okay, we need more information on this, delve down.
Correct. And so we gave them an address that they didn't have access to, and that address led them to the target just as they were leaving their property. And so if they'd been a few minutes later, they would have lost him. And so it was very much a case of giving them right information in time.
Is it very Big Brother? It feels Big Brother.
No, it's really not. I think there's a big perception around sort of the use of data, but that's why, again, some of the principles that we have, the trust principles, of very strong firewalls around who has access to the data. We only use public records data. We're very clear about our methodology for collecting the data and how we publish it, how we use it. And so it's very much about, we're just making available what's already out there, but in a much more connected fashion than you might be able to find yourself.
How do you make value judgments as to for whom you work? So you clearly happily work with American police departments, but if I was the ISIS Division 4, or however their structures work, and I wanted to buy your data, am I welcome to do so?
So obviously we use our own data and doing background checks on who our customers are. And we're a US regulated entity, and so we have to be very careful who we do business with, and we have to be able to prove to the regulators that we're doing business with people that are above board. And so we take that very seriously.
Who makes the above board decision though?
We have a very strong compliance team that does that. So for any
but
new
based on US
on
principles, it's a
US, UK, and then the rest of the world. But we basically comply with all territorial jurisdictions. So in South Africa, we'll comply with all the local laws, but we also have to comply with the global standards. So we do both.
Okay, now the 200 people who work in Cape Town, What is their job?
So their job is to do that research and the data collection.
Are they
and
a global group of people who've centered on Cape Town? They all work there. This is the only Thomson Reuters part of the business that does it, and it's done in Cape Town?
So the headquarters are in Cape Town. We've got some offices in other parts of the world, but the large part of the team sits in Cape Town, and they speak 140 different languages. And
200 people in Cape Town with 140 different languages gathering data from around the world on interesting and interested people.
How amazing is that in terms of African ingenuity and empowering African business?
Why? Because I would think that if you're going to host something like that, you put it, I don't know, in Dubai or somewhere like that. Why Cape Town? Why was that chosen?
It was just actually a coincidence. The founder of the organization, we actually ended up buying the entity, but the founder of the organization was from South Africa, and he was from Cape Town. I actually don't know his name, unfortunately. I should know that, but...
Okay, so the founder of this intelligence gathering operation is somebody who was Cape Town based, and Thomson Reuters bought the business.
Correct.
How very interesting. So we're at the cutting edge of global spy games.
I don't know about that, but definitely global transparency. The whole point of what we're trying to do is to enable transparency and governance and take away this image of Africa as a shady place to do business, right? We have to create an image where Africa is open for business. It's very easy to do business with African counterparties, and that, you can find the same level of information you'll find in the rest of the world.
The White Widow. I mean, you guys tracked her down as well, didn't you?
Yes. So we had all of her aliases.
This was the Kenya attacks as Al-Shabaab. This is 3 years ago now.
Yeah, so we had the data on her various aliases in our system. So any bank that was using our databases, for example, wouldn't have opened accounts for her. And so these are the types of protections that you can give, is to make sure that terrorist financing is not flowing through these countries. And that's exactly why we're doing what we do, is to provide that level of transparency and assurance for foreign investors in these countries.
And demand for the data, I think, is probably spiking upwards.
Absolutely. So with the burdens of risk, regulation, compliance, with some of the things that are happening with cross-border financing, the connections between, the money launderers, the terrorists, the wildlife criminals, all of those connections are really appearing, and more people need to know exactly what's going on before they start investing with a partner or they start funding someone or open a bank account for them. So yes, the demand is, shooting through the roof.
It's an extraordinary story. Sneha Shah, the managing director for Africa at Thomson Reuters. And you thought they just tied bits of paper to the legs of pigeons. Well, they probably still do that. But now it's taking the details of interesting and interested people around the globe. But they probably do it by email nowadays. The managing director of Thomson Reuters Africa, Sneha Shah.